You think moving to the woods will make everything quiet, right? 3 sentences in. And that's where the lie starts the piece. The promise of quiet mornings and wind through pines. That's the thing people sell you when they hand you the deed. And we believed it until the day someone in a starched blazer knocked on our door and announced they were the law. My name is Emma Hale, and my husband Tom, and I thought Juniper Hollow would be a rest stop for two people tired of city sirens and bad coffee. But it turned out to be a battlefield disguised as a neighborhood. We got the cabin from my aunt, a rickety place with the kind of history that makes you feel rooted, creaky floors, a porch that leans just enough to know it's lived in Tom. He's the kind of man who can see a headline in a woodpile, so he started a small column about rural life for the local paper. We wanted quiet. We wanted the kind of mornings where you can hear your own thinking. Instead, we got Darla Voss. Darla arrived like she owned the air around her. Black hair pulled tight, smile that didn't reach her eyes, and a badge clipped to a leather folder, as if the folder itself had jurisdiction. She called it the Juniper Covenant, a neighborhood association with a better PR team than sense, and she started with the usual: a friendly inspector, some forms, a routine review of our property. She asked for permits, old survey maps, chain of title paperwork. She asked in that syrupy way people use when they're hunting for trophies, the kind of friendliness that marks a blade, not a handshake. At first it was small things. A fine for a shed built without a permit. The shed had been part of the house when Aunt June bought it in '72. A complaint about an unauthorized structure in our yard filed by a neighbor who wouldn't put their name behind it. A note slipped under our door saying, "Visible noncompliance," in all caps. Every letter was printed on the same glossy stationery, the same font, the same seal. Tom, being the reporter, smelled patterns. I, being the pragmatic one, started reading. Patterns meant intent. Intent meant someone was orchestrating this. I tried to treat it like a civic annoyance at first because that's what you do. You file, you argue, you go to meetings with coffee and travel mugs, and you try to be reasonable in the fluorescent light of community centers. But Darla made it personal. At a meeting, she stood up and read a paragraph about our history of nonconformity. And you could feel the room tilt, neighbors leaning away from us as if we carried something contagious. Her tone suggested that the problem wasn't the paperwork, it was us. "We're protecting property values," she said, and someone behind me clapped like she'd given a sermon. Below that public performance, something else was happening. There was a whispered conversation with Councilman Pierce, an old man with foxed eyes and a taste for keeping things proprietary. There were developers sniffing around Juniper Hollow, promises of paved access, condos with mountain views. The land here was worth more than it looked, and once land gets a price tag, people tend to forget names and remember profit. We started collecting evidence because that's what two stubborn people do when their lives get uncomfortably scripted by someone else. Tom recorded conversations. I kept every envelope. Hannah, a neighbor with knotty braids and a knack for cameras, offered to set up a small live stream network. Rico, who ran the bait shop and knew everyone's comings and goings, left us a voicemail with a plate number. Each small thing felt like a stitch in a bigger coat, warm and wrong. The harassment got sharper. Someone slashed the tire of our truck, not just a vandal, but calculated. They left a message carved in a post: "Leave." A forged document arrived that threatened a lien. My bar license, an old thing from a hobby I'd never used, was suddenly flagged in an official complaint. They tried to weaponize the bureaucratic language. The very same phrasing that had kept order in town became the hammer to silence us. We reacted the way anyone who has something to lose reacts. We fought back. Not with fire or shouting, but with stubbornly mundane rebellion. We challenged the fines in writing. We demanded notarized documentation. We called the county clerk and asked how the forms had been issued. We went to the community meeting with a binder of receipts and old maps and, more importantly, with people Hannah and Rico and a retired schoolteacher who remembered the land before the covenant existed. The more public we made it, the harder it became for them to pretend the rules were neutral. And still, it escalated. Darla started showing up at odd hours, always with proof in her folder: a stamped letter, a concerned citizen report. The Covenant's board began to threaten foreclosure for non-payment of fines. It read like a bad novel. Paragraph after paragraph of legalese meant to terrify, to make us think the law itself had turned against neighbors. But the real turning point was when Councilman Pierce grew impatient. He wanted a quick sale, quick roads, quick development. He wanted to make Juniper Hollow legible to outside money, and we were the only ones in the way of a clean corridor from the ridge to the river. One night, Tom and I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee and the weight of the town pressing in. He looked at me and said, quietly, "They're trying to write our names out of the place." That felt more personal than any find someone trying to rewrite the sentence of our lives. We decided then to stop being defensive and start being strategic. We stopped answering every little provocation and instead started building a case. Hannah's cameras were small and stubborn. They caught Darla at odd moments, flinches, and private phone calls. Rico took notes on who met who and when. Tom wrote a piece not for the big presses, but a measured column tracing the money, the motives, the meetings at the council hall that coincided with suspicious permits. The piece made one thing clear. There was a network, a predictable choreography of meetings and favors and quiet deals. People like Councilman Pierce don't make their paper trails neat by accident. That's when the game changed. Darla, sensing the walls caving in, snapped. She organized a public shaming a town forum, and she chose her stage like a playwright choosing a climax. The room was packed, and the lights were all wrong for truth. She dove into character, one hand on the podium, the other holding up a file of violations and names. She called us recidivists, threw out phrases like community safety, and baited the room with fear. But she didn't reckon with how many people had been watching quietly, or with the live feed that Hannah had set up in a back room where it wouldn't be obvious. As Darla ranted, Tom caught her on microphone saying something different, something not for the public record to pierce over a cutoff line. "We had it, then. Get them off the ridge before the bidders close," she said. That line moved the room like a gust of wind. It exposed motive. It turned a performance into a confession. People shifted, some jaw dropped, others angry. In the stunned silence, Councilman Pierce's composure cracked just enough for Rico to press a recorder into his hand and ask, "Care to explain?" They responded with a surge of aggression. Pierce had an ally, a man named Barton who'd always been too quick with a temper. Barton cornered Tom outside after the meeting. He pulled a gun, a ridiculous, awful escalation, made worse because it felt like the only honest thing in a long play of lies. Barton shouted, chest heaving, "This is how you get their attention." For a wild second, it felt like the story would end in a headline I never wanted. Tragedy on Juniper Ridge. Instead, something quieter happened. Hannah's feed was live and being monitored by a friend of hers who worked at the state attorney's office, a friend who'd seen enough uploaded clips to raise an eyebrow, and when Barton moved like he meant it, the caller started dialing. Deputies arrived less than 10 minutes later. Barton dropped the gun when he realized he was being recorded, and the thing he'd thought would intimidate became the last desperate act of a man cornered by his own fear. The arrests that followed weren't cinematic in the way movies are. They were messy and bureaucratic and slow and, finally, human. Darla tried to vanish into committees and statements, but the paper trail caught up. Councilman Pierce had to answer questions he couldn't fake his way out of. Barton sat in a holding cell and muttered that he'd been doing what he was told. It was clean in a way the town needed, but it left scars where the loud victory should have been. Afterward, Juniper Hollow split into factions. Those who cheered the arrests, and those who whispered that the outsiders us had ruined their chance at progress. Some people thanked us at the farmer's market and then turned away. Others refused to look us in the eye. There was rebuilding to do, not just of porches and fences, but of trust. We held community meetings that were real this time, not theater. We rewrote bylaws. We planted a garden on the town green because nothing heals like getting your hands dirty in public. I still wake up on some mornings and listen for the sirens that don't come, and on some evenings I find myself looking at the manila folders in the closet and wondering what else is possible when a town decides who it wants to be. We won what mattered, the right to keep our home, but the deeper victory was quiet. The neighbors who learned how to read a balance sheet, the kids who saw adults stand up without guns or threats, the way truth crept back into the room like light. So where does the story land? It's wrapped up enough to feel like a movie, with a clear enemy and a few arrests, but it's messy because people are. Some of Juniper Hollow wants a paved road, some don't. Some still talk about the Juniper Covenant like it was a shield, not seeing how it became a sword. We didn't solve everything. We exposed people, not systems. We reclaimed our cabin, but the town still carries the memory of what nearly happened. If you were in our shoes, what would you do? Fight? Leave? Bargain? Was our stubbornness vindication or provocation? Tell me what you think is justice in a place like Juniper Hollow, where land, pride, and profit collide. Drop your thoughts below, and if you've ever stood your ground in a small place that wanted you gone, share that too. I want to hear it, because this was never just our story, it was, and is, everyone's if they're willing to listen.